Joining us now, member of the House Homeland Security, Judiciary and Intelligence Committees, Democratic Congresswoman Val Demings of Florida. Congresswoman Demings, thank you so much for being on the show. Given the president's pronouncements and bragging about what has been done, what is the reality in your district as it pertains to the front lines having what they need?
Well, let me just say this, Mika. I have not been able to endure or bear the president's daily briefings anymore because the words coming out of his mouth have been unbelievable. And I believe they risk lives all over this country. No one, the president or the governor here in Florida, should be taking a victory lap when people are continuing to lose their lives because of COVID-19. In Florida, we have over 36,000 people who have contracted the virus. We have over 1,500 deaths. And so I would just like to hear the president and my governor and others who think that it's okay to go back to business as normal, talk to those families who've lost their loved ones. Look, nobody wants to get the economy started again more than I do. I hear from small business owners and others every day about their fears, about their businesses. We have over 1 million people here in the state of Florida who filed for unemployment and can't access a system that the governor knew had multiple problems. Last year, he knew that. But the primary responsibility for me as a member of Congress and for our governor and our president is the health, safety, and well-being of the American people, the health, safety, and well-being of Floridians. And we should not be willing to jeopardize that for over anything.
So what could the president be doing that he is clearly not doing in your mind that could help get to a place where we could reopen more safely?
Well, why don't we start with listening to the medical experts, listening to the doctors, listening to our scientists, listening to those who are responsible for developing a vaccine, not spreading false information that has not been proven about potential medications or vaccines that have not been tested. That would be a good place for the leader to start. What about fully implementing the Defense Production Act to make sure that those who are on the front line, not just our doctors and our medical personnel, but our first responders have the proper equipment that they need every day to protect and save lives? And so that would be, I believe, a good start. You know, our governor has taken a victory lap and celebrated the fact that the deaths or the number of cases in Florida predicted that the actual cases have been lower than what was predicted. Well, the reason those cases are lower is because Floridians took the warnings seriously. And in the absence of strategic, effective leadership, Floridians decided to shelter in place, and as a result of the lack of leadership, local governments took responsibility in their own hands and issued stay-at-home orders. On March 1st, the Surgeon General of Florida declared a public health emergency, but it wasn't until April 3rd that the governor issued a stay-at-home order. So we want to get there, but we're not there, and we have nothing to celebrate as we continue to see numbers in Florida go up and numbers around this country go up.
Willie.
Congresswoman Demings, Willie Geist, good to have you with us this morning. I think a lot about your district because those big theme parks, Universal, Orlando, SeaWorld, Disney World, and those tens of thousands of employees who need those jobs, they're sitting empty right now. What do you say to them as they start to wonder, hey, couldn't we inch our way toward opening up a little bit? Maybe not a theme park, but people at restaurants, couldn't we sit 6 feet apart? Couldn't we have 25% capacity like Governor DeSantis has implemented at this point? How do you balance, when you talk to your constituents, the need for public health on the one hand, but also people's need to get back to work and support their families?
Well, yeah, I appreciate that question. As you know, all of the theme parks are in my district. Disney alone employs over 77,000 individuals. There's no doubt people are hurting. There's no doubt our theme parks, they've been closed, had their doors closed since March 15th. Just think about that. The number of people they employ, the number of people that go through their gates every day. But I have been very pleased that the theme parks, while they are hurting, while the employees are hurting, have really shown what I believe has been, they've taken great responsibility to make sure that they do not reopen until we are ready to do so. As you know, the governor has relaxed our stay-at-home orders and started to reopen this week. But the theme parks have chosen not to do that. They do not want to reopen their gates until they feel that people visiting their parks will be safe, until they feel that their employees will be safe. And look, their employees have done an extraordinary job too. They're ready to get back to work. They're worried about their families. They're worried about their rent, their mortgages, their children. But they also want to do what they need to do to keep their families safe and obey those orders that are in place. And so we are thankful. And like I said earlier, no one wants to get back to business as usual. I don't know if we'll ever really get back to business as usual, but we do and appreciate the level of cooperation that we are receiving here on the ground.
I know your focus, Congresswoman, rightly is on the people in your district, but there are a lot of people. It's one of the worst kept secrets in politics right now is that Joe Biden is considering you as his choice to be a vice presidential running mate, to be the nominee to be vice president. You come from a very important state and a very important district, more specifically, the I-4 corridor there in Orlando. You have a great personal story, a great track record as the police chief in Orlando. If you were asked to be vice president, what would you say?
Well, Willie, I have dedicated my life to public service. And having served as a social worker, a career law enforcement officer, a police chief, and now a member of Congress, I chose tough jobs. We're dealing with a tough time right now. We're in the middle of a crisis. I've dealt with crisis before. And as I look at the condition of our country right now and the absolute lack of leadership, you know, at the very least, we ought to be able to have a leader that we can trust. We ought to be able to have a leader that when they're taking the podium and giving direction, that we can believe that what is coming out of their mouths is true. We don't have that right now. And if asked, I would be honored to serve alongside Joe Biden and do everything within my power to get this country back on track, not just here in the nation, but around the world.
Congresswoman Val Demings, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. Please come back. Thank you. And still ahead, we're going to talk to Anand Giridharadas. Thank you. As the U.S. continues to struggle with the race and wealth disparities amid the coronavirus pandemic. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.